Have you ever wondered what happens when a man with nothing left to lose goes to war with the system? Well, today's story is about a man who lived through the worst of it all, working in coal mines, surviving brutal wars, and coaching high school football for 35 years. But when he was betrayed by the very people he had given everything to, he made them pay in ways they never expected. This is a tale of a man who fought for what was his, and in the end, left the school district nearly bankrupt. Welcome to the story of my granddad the coach, who gave zero fucks. Growing up in the heart of Depression-era Virginia, my granddad's life was anything but easy. Times were tough, and opportunities were scarce. The region was known for its coal mines, a back-breaking job that kept families like his barely scraping by. The pay was meager, and the work was grueling 12-hour shifts down in the dark. Damp mines, pulling out coal that would fuel a country's industrial growth, but barely keeping the miners themselves alive. He saw his father and uncles, along with countless other men, spend their lives toiling away in the mines. It was a hard, dirty existence, and there didn't seem to be much chance of escape. But my granddad was a man with big dreams, a guy who wanted something more. He was tough as nails, even at a young age, and he wasn't the type to sit back and accept his fate. He knew the mines weren't going to be his forever, and he longed for a way out. He didn't have the luxury of higher education or connections, so he enlisted in the Marine Corps. At that point, the military was the only option for someone like him, a way to break free from the confines of a life dictated by poverty and hard labor. But it wasn't just about leaving the mines behind. The Marines represented something more, an opportunity to prove himself, to escape the mundane, and perhaps, most importantly, to become part of something bigger than himself. The world was changing, and before he knew it, my granddad found himself shipped off to Korea in the early 1950s, right in the middle of the Korean War. For a kid from a small town in Virginia, this was as big as it got. The war itself was brutal. The conditions were horrific, and my granddad didn't come out unscathed. He saw things that would break most men: combat, death, and the overwhelming weight of fighting for survival on foreign soil. The horrors of war would leave scars that stayed with him long after he returned home. But through it all, he proved his mettle in ways that most people can't even imagine. The Marines didn't just train him to fight, they forged his character. The discipline, the grit, the sheer willpower to push through hardship, those were the things that would define him for the rest of his life. The military taught him how to handle the worst situations, how to lead under pressure, and how to persevere when every part of you just wants to give up. In Korea, he learned more about himself than he ever thought possible. When the war ended and my granddad came back to Virginia, he wasn't the same young man who had left. The boy who had worked the coal mines and dreamed of a better life was now a seasoned Marine, hardened by war and ready for whatever came next. The war had given him the kind of discipline and determination that would set him on a path he never imagined. He wasn't just looking for a way out anymore. He was looking for a way to succeed. But life back home wasn't easy either. While he had earned his stripes as a Marine, he was still just a man from a poor mining town with few options. But as fate would have it, that would soon change. The lessons he learned in Korea would soon help him navigate a world of new challenges, including one he never saw coming: coaching high school football. It is strange to think how such a hard and brutal life had led him to a new battlefield, one where strategy, discipline, and toughness would still serve him well. After my granddad returned from Korea, life didn't exactly hand him a break. The scars of war stayed with him, both physical and emotional, but he wasn't one to sit around feeling sorry for himself. The tough-as-nails Marine that emerged from the Korean battlefield, wasn't he about to let the mundane struggles of everyday life get in the way? Instead of letting himself get stuck in a rut, he pushed forward looking for something new, something that would channel the discipline and resilience he had learned in the Corps. He tried his hand at a few odd jobs, always keeping his head down and grinding. But it wasn't tea until he landed an unexpected gig as a high school football coach that everything began to shift. Now, you might think someone like him would have some kind of football pedigree, maybe a college career or some high-profile coaching experience, but nope. The reality was that my granddad had never played high school football, let alone college. He wasn't a trained coach, and he had no formal background in the sport. But what he did have was a wealth of experience in leading people, building tough teams, and getting the best out of whoever was in front of him. And those were the qualities that mattered most. The school district probably thought it was a safe bet, hiring a man who had been a Marine and had worked his tail off in the mines. What they didn't know was that he had something far more valuable than coaching experience. He had the ability to connect with kids. He knew how to get people to listen, how to inspire them to push past their limits, and most importantly, how to win. From the moment he stepped onto that field, he had a presence. His no-nonsense approach wasn't for everyone, but for the kids who bought into his vision, it was everything. He ran practices like a drill sergeant. There was no room for softness or excuses, and there was no letting up. If you wanted to play for him, you had to earn it, and that was exactly the kind of mentality my granddad wanted to instill in his players. His coaching style wasn't flashy, but it was effective. He focused on the fundamentals: hard work, discipline, and toughness. He didn't try to reinvent the wheel. Instead, he made sure that his team knew the basics better than anyone else. He instilled a sense of pride in the players, teaching them not just how to play football, but how to approach life with the same intensity and dedication. And let me tell you, these kids didn't just respect him, they feared him. Over the next 35 years, my granddad built a legacy as one of the most successful high school football coaches in the region. He racked up hundreds of games and turned a small-town team into a powerhouse. The wins piled up, and so did the accolades. He became a local legend, and the scoreboard often spoke louder than words. His teams were known for being gritty, disciplined, and tough as nails, just like their coach. His win-to-loss ratio became something that the school district couldn't ignore. By the time he retired, he had coached nearly 1,000 games, with a record that most coaches would envy. But life wasn't just about football for my granddad. Behind the scenes, he lived life on his own terms. He was a man who never cared much about rules or societal expectations. On weekends, you could find him at the local gamecock fights, putting down some cash and betting on birds that were as tough as he was. He had a reputation for being a charmer. He could talk his way out of anything. Cops in town knew him, but more often than not, they'd let him go with a warning. He had this way of working the system in a way that made him almost untouchable. And of course, there were the women. He didn't stick with any one woman for too long, and though he had 3 wives over the years, it's safe to say none of them could hold him down. It wasn't that he didn't care. He just had his own way of doing things. But despite all of this, there was one thing that always kept him going: football. It was the one place where his disciplined, no-nonsense approach worked like magic. On the field, his reputation as a no-excuses, all-in coach was cemented, and his players knew that they could count on him to push them to be the best versions of themselves. As the years went by, my granddad's name became synonymous with success on the field. He wasn't just a coach, he was an institution. He had seen it all and had the scars to prove it, both from his time in Korea and from his long career on the football field. Through all the struggles, the fights, and the heartaches, football was the one constant in his life. It gave him purpose, it gave him direction, and it gave him something to fight for long after the war was over. Life has a funny way of throwing curveballs when you least expect it. After 35 years of dedication, hard work, and countless victories, my granddad thought he had it all figured out. He had built something that few could ever replicate, an impressive legacy as the head football coach at the high school. He had poured his blood, sweat, and tears into. His name was known and respected not just in the town, but throughout the entire region. His players admired him, and the community counted on him. Yet, in a moment of corporate-like decision-making, the school district made a move that no one saw coming, a decision that would change everything. The district, in its infinite wisdom, decided to merge my granddad's school with a neighboring town's high school. On the surface, this seemed like a reasonable move away to consolidate resources and streamline operations for the new, combined school. But underneath that decision lay a mistake that would spark an absolute storm. The merger meant only one head coach could remain at the helm for the new team. At this point, my granddad had nearly 35 years of experience under his belt, having coached close to 1,000 games. His win-loss record was outstanding, a testament to his ability to build a winning team year after year. He had seen it all: the tough losses, the triumphant wins, the heartaches, and the celebrations. He had earned his place, and his reputation was rock solid. But the district, for reasons that only they could explain, chose to overlook all that experience and history. Instead of going with the seasoned coach who had proven his worth time and time again, they picked the other guy, the head coach from the neighboring school. This man, who had only 150 games to his name and a record that leaned heavily toward the losing side, was now the one who would lead the new, combined school. It wasn't just an unfair decision. It was a blatant slap in the face to everything my granddad had built. Here was a man who had spent more than 3 decades coaching, who had won hundreds of games, and who had dedicated his life to this sport and this school, only to be cast aside for a guy who couldn't even come close to his record. It felt like a punch to the gut, not just for my granddad, but for the whole community that had supported him. But the school board didn't see it that way. They thought they were being smart, making the forward-thinking decision by choosing the younger, less experienced coach. Maybe they thought he represented a new direction, or perhaps they were blinded by the politics of the situation. Who knows? What was clear, though, was that they had no idea what they were about to unleash. For a man like my granddad, who had survived the worst that life could throw at him, this decision was nothing short of outrageous. He wasn't just going to roll over and accept being pushed out of the position he had earned. This was a man who had fought in wars, worked in the coal mines, and led kids to victory for decades. He wasn't about to let some desk-pushing bureaucrats in a district office decide his fate without a fight. It didn't take long for my granddad to make his feelings known. He didn't mince words, and he certainly didn't keep quiet about what he thought was a completely unjust decision. He didn't just feel personally slighted. He felt like the entire town was being disrespected. The football program wasn't just a job for him. It was a part of the community's identity. It was what brought people together on Friday nights, what gave the kids something to strive for, and what made them proud. The idea that they were going to throw all of that away in favor of a less experienced coach was, to him, nothing short of sacrilege. The school board, however, was unmoved. Their minds were made up, and there was no turning back. So they did what any good bureaucrats would do. They removed my granddad from the head coach position entirely and reassigned him to teach 8th grade health science. The logic behind the decision? The school board didn't think his coaching experience qualified him for an administrative position at the new combined school. But here's the kicker. They made him teach health science, a subject he had zero interest in and no experience with. It wasn't just a demotion. It was a humiliation. Now, let me tell you something about my granddad. This was the same guy who had survived working in coal mines as a young man in the 40s, had faced down communist soldiers in Korea, and could charm his way out of just about any trouble. This was a man who didn't give two shits about what anyone thought. He wasn't the type to quietly accept this kind of treatment, and the school district had made one hell of a mistake thinking he would. Instead of quietly resigning or going along with the district's decision, my granddad decided to make them pay. He wasn't just going to disappear into an 8th grade classroom, shuffling papers and teaching kids who didn't care. No, he was going to make them regret this decision, and he would do it in a way they would never forget. What came next was nothing short of legendary. The school board had no idea what they had done. They thought they had rid themselves of an old, stubborn coach, but they were about to find out that they had just poked a hornet's nest. So when the school district thought they could break him by giving him a classroom full of 8th graders, they had no idea what they were dealing with. Now my granddad wasn't the type to just roll over. No, when the school board thought they could humiliate him, they underestimated the stubborn streak that ran through his veins. He wasn't going to quietly accept their decision. Instead, he did what any man like him would do. He went straight to the school board and demanded justice. But they weren't having any of it. They didn't even give him the respect of a real conversation. No one listened to his complaints or even tried to see it from his perspective. They didn't care about the years of service he had given or the hundreds of boys he had mentored. To them, he was just another cog in the machine, easy to replace. And so, in a cold, bureaucratic decision, they decided to strip him of his position and throw him into teaching health science to a bunch of 8th graders who didn't care and probably wouldn't listen anyway. This was the slap in the face my granddad wasn't going to forget. He wasn't just some old man who could be tossed aside. He was a force of nature. And if they thought they could punish him by sticking him in a classroom full of kids, they were gravely mistaken. What they didn't realize was that they had just opened the floodgates to a storm that was about to cost them dearly. Never one to back down from a fight, my granddad wasn't about to quietly accept his fate. He had a plan, a brilliant, if somewhat vindictive one. See, the man had never once taken a sick day in his entire career. Not a single one. In all his years of coaching and teaching, he had worked tirelessly, never asking for a break, always putting in the hours. And over that time, he had accumulated a massive amount of leave time days and days of paid time off that, according to the district's rules, he had every right to use. So my granddad made a decision. If they wanted to stick him in a classroom, he was going to make them regret it in the most disruptive way possible. He wasn't going to sit there quietly, teaching health science once a week to a bunch of indifferent students. Instead, he would use his accrued leave days, and he would use them all at once. For an entire semester, my granddad only showed up to school on Mondays. That's it. He'd walk into his 8th grade classroom, say his piece, and leave. The rest of the week, gone. He didn't show up. Not once. And the district had no choice but to scramble. They had to find substitute teachers to fill his spot, and let me tell you, it wasn't easy. The costs of those substitute teachers started piling up fast, and the district was starting to feel the weight of their decision. The first couple of weeks, they probably thought it was a fluke, that my granddad would snap out of it and get back to his full schedule. But as the days stretched into weeks, and the substitute teachers continued to come in and out of that classroom, it became clear. This wasn't a mistake. This was a deliberate act of revenge, and my granddad wasn't going to back down. But that wasn't the end of it. No, this was just the beginning. As the semester continued, the district started to feel the financial strain. The cost of hiring substitutes to cover my granddad's classes was astronomical, and it was clear they hadn't anticipated anything like this. What they didn't realize was that my granddad wasn't just disrupting the school as schedule. He was shaking the very foundation of the district as operations. They had taken a man who had spent over 30 years building up the school as football program and had thrown him into a classroom as if he were nothing more than a minor inconvenience. Now they were going to feel the consequences of that decision. The school district had never dealt with a teacher or a coach like my granddad. They thought they could push him aside, remove him from the field, and stick him in a classroom. But they didn't realize that when you push a man like him, he doesn't just take it quietly. He fights back, and he fights hard. The situation escalated quickly. As more and more substitute teachers filled in for my granddad, the costs to the district continued to rise. It was becoming clear to everyone involved that the school board had made a huge mistake. My granddad wasn't just causing trouble. He was forcing the district to deal with the consequences of their actions in a way they had never expected. And here's the kicker. Through it all, my granddad didn't even need to say much. The mere fact that he showed up on Mondays, then disappeared for the rest of the week, spoke volumes. The school board, who thought they were being clever by forcing him into a classroom, were now stuck with the mess they had created. It was becoming more and more apparent that the longer this went on, the more it was costing them, not just in money, but in credibility. This wasn't just some petty revenge. It was a battle of principles. My granddad wasn't going to be bullied into submission. And as he watched the school district squirm, he couldn't help but feel a certain satisfaction. They had tried to push him out, but instead, they had made the mistake of underestimating a man who had already survived more than most people could ever dream of. The storm was only just beginning, and my granddad was in it for the long haul. Naturally, the school district wasn't just going to sit back and let my granddad get away with his little rebellion. After all, they had a reputation to maintain, and here was this man, this old stubborn coach making a mockery of their carefully laid plans. They were furious, and they didn't like the public humiliation they were suffering. They needed him back in the classroom full time, and they needed it now. So, what did they do? They filed a lawsuit against him. They thought they could intimidate him with legal action, force him to return to a full teaching schedule, and put an end to this nonsense once and for all. They figured that with their resources, their lawyers, and their authority, they'd make him back down. After all, they were the ones in power. But they made one huge mistake. They underestimated my granddad, a man who had stared down bigger battles, and won, and who wasn't about to let some school district push him around. The lawsuit wasn't a surprise to him. In fact, he had been waiting for it. He knew they would try to drag him through the courts. But what they didn't realize was that this wasn't just a matter of workdays or sick leave. It was personal. It was about respect. My granddad wasn't just fighting for a paycheck or for some petty victory. He was fighting for his dignity, for the dignity of his career, and for the community that had supported him for all those years. And the school district, in their arrogance, had taken that away from him. The lawsuit dragged on, and soon enough, it was time for the case to go before a judge. My granddad wasn't intimidated by the idea of a courtroom. He had dealt with far more dangerous situations in his life than sitting before a judge in a small-town courtroom. He didn't need a fancy lawyer or a whole team of legal experts. He had lived through the worst and had come out on top every time. What did a courtroom full of school board bureaucrats matter to him? When the day of the hearing came, the tension in the air was thick. The district had all their ducks in a row. They were prepared to argue that my granddad was violating his contractual obligations, that his actions were disrupting the educational environment, and that he was costing the district thousands of dollars in unnecessary substitute fees. They presented their case with all the typical legal jargon, trying to paint him as the villain. They made their arguments, but what they didn't count on was the judge. This judge wasn't the type to bow down to bureaucratic nonsense. He was a man who had seen his share of legal battles, and he wasn't about to let the district bully a man who had given decades of his life to serve the community. When my granddad's turn came, he didn't need to shout or rant. He simply told his side of the story. He explained the injustice, the disrespect, and how the school district had treated him after all his years of service. He didn't need to embellish. The truth spoke for itself. The judge, sitting quietly as the district's lawyers made their case, was calm, but you could see the wheels turning in his head. He didn't need to be told who the real villain was in this situation. He saw the bigger picture. This wasn't just about one man and his sick days. It was about how an entire community was being treated by a district that seemed to forget the value of hard work and loyalty. When the judge finally spoke, it was clear that he wasn't having any of it. He wasn't about to let the school district get away with their petty tactics. He didn't mince words when he turned to the district's lawyer and told them to fuck off. That was it. A simple phrase that, in that moment, carried more weight than any legal jargon could ever convey. The judge wasn't about to punish a man who had spent his life giving to the community, especially not for something so petty and vindictive. The ruling was a clear victory for my granddad. The judge sided with him, recognizing that the district had provoked him into this situation. He saw that my granddad wasn't just acting out of spite, he was reacting to an injustice. The district had treated him with disrespect, and the judge wasn't about to let them get away with it. He made it clear that my granddad was within his rights to take the time he had earned. And that was all my granddad needed to hear. From that moment on, he didn't change a thing. He didn't feel the need to show up every day, didn't feel pressured to be a model teacher for the district. He wasn't about to let the district win just because they had money and power on their side. Instead, he kept up his one-day-a-week routine, continuing to cost the district tens of thousands of dollars in substitute teacher fees. Every week, they had to scramble to find someone to fill his spot, an ever-growing expense that they couldn't ignore. The district quickly realized they were in over their heads. The money they were losing to substitute teacher fees was mounting, and as time went on, they had no way of stopping it. Their hands were tied. They couldn't force him to return to a full schedule, and the legal battle had only made them look foolish. The school board thought they had a game plan, but they had underestimated the power of a man who wasn't willing to back down. What they hadn't counted on was how deeply my granddad believed in standing up for what was right. They thought they could break him, humiliate him, and force him to bend to their will. But instead, they found themselves caught in a battle they couldn't win. The courtroom showdown was a turning point, a clear indication that my granddad was not a man to be trifled with. And the district, despite all their power, was left holding the bag, while my granddad continued to do exactly what he had set out to do, make them pay for the mistake they'd made. For a year and a half, the situation with my granddad and the school district dragged on, a slow burn of tension, frustration, and mounting costs. The district, which thought they could rid themselves of an old, stubborn coach and replace him with a new direction, was now hemorrhaging money. They had no idea what they were in for when they forced him into that 8th grade health science classroom. They figured it was a punishment, a way to demote him, break his spirit, and force him to walk away quietly. But they didn't account for the fact that my granddad didn't work that way. While the district tried desperately to figure out a way to fix the problem they had created, my granddad was living his best life. Gone were the days of clocking in every morning, reporting to a job he had loved for decades. Instead, he took advantage of his newfound freedom to do whatever the hell he wanted. He didn't need to answer to anyone, and he certainly wasn't going to be coerced back into a full-time teaching schedule or into coaching the school's football team. No, my granddad spent his days doing exactly what he enjoyed, fighting gamecocks, charming his way out of trouble with the law, and relishing every moment of his time away from the constraints of a job that had once defined him. Now, some people might think that was a waste of time or that he was acting recklessly. But for my granddad, it was about living on his own terms. He had given 35 years of his life to the school district, pouring his heart and soul into his job, and this was his time to take it easy. He wasn't going to waste his final years running a rat race for a bunch of bureaucrats who had no respect for him. And while the district could try to punish him, they didn't realize that they had just given him the ultimate freedom. As the months wore on, the school district began to feel the weight of their decision. They had thought that making him take a back seat in the classroom would break him, but instead, it only made him stronger. He wasn't getting any younger, but he had years of accrued sick time, and they were paying for it. The district was coughing up tens of thousands of dollars to hire substitute teachers, and it quickly became clear that they were losing far more than they could afford. But it wasn't just the money. The district began to realize they had made an enemy. My granddad wasn't just a disgruntled employee. He was a force of nature, a man of principle who wasn't going to back down because some school board thought they could push him around. The more they tried to reason with him, the more they offered him other positions or made accommodations. The more it became clear that they didn't understand the type of man they were dealing with. They tried everything they could think of to get him back on a regular schedule. They offered him different teaching assignments, hoping to entice him to return to full-time work. They even went so far as to offer him a special coach emeritus, title something to make him feel like he was still a part of the system, but not actually in charge of anything. But none of it worked. My granddad wasn't the type to compromise. This wasn't just about money. It was about respect. And the school district had already made it clear that they didn't respect him. So why should he go back and pretend like everything was fine? The more the district tried to play hardball, the more they realized they were the ones getting played. They had no leverage. They had already tried to strong-arm him, tried to bully him into submission, but they weren't prepared for his stubbornness. My granddad had been through too much in his life to be pushed around by people who thought they could make decisions from behind desks in boardroom tables. And while they had the power to make policies, he had the power to make them pay. There were days when the district tried to make him feel guilty, reminding him of how much they had done for him over the years, how much they valued his service. But my granddad wasn't buying it. To him, this wasn't about favors or gratitude, it was about principles. He had spent his entire career in the trenches, building something that was now being destroyed because of a decision that made no sense. He wasn't going to just roll over because they suddenly wanted to make it right. No, he was going to make them sweat. It was in these moments that you could truly see the depth of his character. He didn't flinch, didn't blink. He didn't need the approval of the district to feel good about himself. The real victory wasn't in getting his job back. It was in making the district face the consequences of their actions. Every day they had to scramble to find a substitute. Every week they saw the costs pile up was another small victory for him. The fact that he was living his life the way he wanted, on his own terms, was the true payoff. And as the war of attrition wore on, it became clear that the district was losing. The situation was a drain on their resources, and their reputation was taking a hit. They had tried to punish him for standing up for himself, but all they had done was strengthen his resolve. The longer this dragged on, the more the community saw what was really going on. They knew my granddad had been wronged, and they weren't about to forget it. The district had thought they could break him with bureaucracy, with legal threats and paper pushing. But they hadn't reckoned with the fact that my granddad wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for the principle of not being pushed around. Every day he stayed away from that classroom, he was winning. Every week he didn't show up, the district was losing. They had no idea just how deep my granddad's resolve ran. And as the months stretched on, they started to realize that this wasn't just a battle they could throw money at and make go away. They had made the mistake of trying to crush a man who couldn't be crushed. But this story doesn't end with his resignation. No, my granddad wasn't the kind of man to just fade into the background after walking away from a fight. He didn't just leave the district hanging in the wind. He took that opportunity to show them exactly how little their decision to screw him over actually mattered. The district had made their move, but my granddad was far from done. He wasn't going to just retire into obscurity or give them the satisfaction of thinking they'd gotten the best of him. No, he had one more victory to claim, and it came in the form of a new coaching job. It didn't take long for the neighboring district to realize what they had on their hands. Word of my granddad's resignation and his unyielding spirit spread quickly through the area. And it wasn't long before another school district came knocking. This wasn't just any district. It was one that recognized his talent, his reputation, and the sheer grit he had demonstrated over the years. They knew they had just been presented with an opportunity to bring in a seasoned coach who could not only turn around a struggling program, but could also inject some much-needed leadership into their community. They wasted no time offering him a new position as head coach, eager to snatch up a man who had made a name for himself in the world of high school football. And just like that, my granddad moved on, leaving the old district behind, a district that had tried to destroy him with no more than a passing thought. He didn't need to look back. He didn't need to gloat or prove anything further. His departure from that district was the ultimate statement. Their attempt to break him had failed, and now they were left with nothing but the mess they'd made. 0 fucks given. That became his motto in the aftermath. He wasn't interested in revenge for the sake of revenge. He wasn't interested in fighting just for the sake of fighting. He had already won. The victory was in living his life on his terms, in proving that no matter how hard they tried to knock him down, he would always get back up and keep moving forward. He took the new job, and before long, his reputation preceded him. The new district saw immediately what the old one had missed. They saw the leader, the coach, the mentor, the man who could take a group of kids and turn them into more than just a football team. Under his leadership, the program flourished. His new players thrived. The district that had hired him knew they had made the right choice. They didn't just get a coach, they got a legend. As for my granddad, he never looked back. He didn't need closure or validation. He didn't need anyone's approval. He had the satisfaction of knowing that, in the end, he came out on top. The old district, meanwhile, was left to clean up the mess they had made. The community knew who had really won in this whole saga, and it wasn't the school board that had tried to push him aside. In the end, it wasn't just about football. It wasn't just about the money or the prestige. It was about standing up for what was right, for demanding respect, and for showing that no one, not even a school district, could break. A man who had already been through the toughest battles life could offer. My granddad's victory wasn't in a paycheck or in any specific coaching title. It was in the way he lived his life, on his own terms, with no apologies, and with absolutely 0 fucks given. He had shown everyone, especially the district that tried to humiliate him, that a man of principle doesn't just fade away. He stands tall, moves on to bigger and better things, and leaves the people who tried to break him wondering what the hell just happened. My granddad's story is one of quiet defiance, a reminder that sometimes the system doesn't win, especially when it tries to break someone who's already been through the hardest of times. He fought for what he deserved, and in the end, left a legacy that will never be forgotten. It's a story of resilience, of standing tall when everything around you seems to be crumbling. He may be gone now, but his lesson remains. Never let anyone push you around, and never, ever give a single fuck. Rest in peace, Grandpa. You earned it. If you enjoyed this story of revenge, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe for more, and share this with anyone who needs a reminder that sometimes the best revenge is just living well and sticking it to the people who try to tear you down. See you next time.